Hi, this is Braden Holtby.
Hey, this is Tanner the Bulldozer Bozer.
Hi, this is Brian Burke from Toronto, Ontario.
This is Daryl Sutter.
Hello, everyone. I'm Carly Agro from Sportsnet Central.
This is Jay Onright.
This is Quick Dick coming to you from MacNutt, Saskatchewan.
Hey, everybody. My name is Theo Fleury.
This is Kelly Rudy.
This is Corey Cross.
This is Wade Redden.
This is Jordan Tutu.
My name is Jim Pattison.
Hey, it's Ron McLean, Hockey Night in Canada and Rogers Hometown Hockey, and welcome to the Sean Newman Podcast.
Now, let's get on to that T-Bar 1 tale of the tape. Originally from MacNutt, Saskatchewan, he did the play-by-play for the Brandon Wheat Kings, the Manitoba Moose. From 1998 to 2006, he hosted Hockey Central on Sportsnet. Since July 2006, he's been with TSN, and he has become one of the best hockey insiders there is. I'm talking about Mr. Darren Dreger. So buckle up. Here we go.
Hi, everybody. This is Darren Dreger. Welcome to the Sean Newman Podcast.
Sean Newman Podcast. Today I'm joined by Mr. Darren Dreger. So first off, sir, thanks for hopping on.
Hey, no worries, Sean. As you can see, I've gotten rid of the TV attire, and this is Darren Dreger in my home office / studio, probably 99.5% of the time.
Well, first off, I guess, how are things in your world? Adjusting it. I say the new norm, but geez, we've been in this now for, it's been a long time. It's been, 8-9 months, I suppose now that it's kind of been, we've been kind of in this. So how are things going on your end? It seems that's probably where we should start is well-being, I think has been on the top of my mind a lot lately.
Yeah. And I think that's fair. I think that, you speak for most of us when you say that, and all things considered, in the Dreger world, all things are going well. I'm fortunate enough to, again, be able to have the home studio. So we can almost do everything that we would normally do. We can do virtually here for TSN. We've got Insider Trading, which, airs Tuesdays and Thursdays on SportsCenter and on tsn.ca. I do That's Hockey with Gino Retta a couple of times a week, multiple radio shows over the course of the week. And that's the professional side of my life. Personally, what's different is I have two children. I've got a almost 22-year-old daughter, Katie, who's in fourth year university at Ryerson. She wrote her LSAT, during the pandemic and has applied to multiple law schools across Canada. So she's here online, trying to complete year 4 online from home. And my 19-year-old son, Mason, who is a student at Guelph University, he's in his second year. And he too is working from home. And on top of all of that, if I didn't confuse my family enough, we actually sold our house and bought and renovated another house this summer in the midst of a global pandemic. So that's kind of, Sean, that's how I, keep my sanity, to be frank, by occupying my days with whatever is going on. Personally, it was a renovation and throwing myself into a general contracting type of role. And then professionally, there's still lots of hockey talk, I would say, around the NHL and with the upcoming World Juniors, focusing on that as well.
Well, a busy guy. That's what I hear. I chuckle myself because in the podcasting world, I started this in February 2019. The listeners get to hear this probably once every couple of weeks. I tell this story, but when I started in February 2019, I was doing one a week. And really enjoyed it, but I work full time. I got 3 kids, 4 and under, so I'm a different type of busy from your 2 older ones. And then when the pandemic hit, instead of I guess I'll sit at home, I started cranking out 2 a week is what I release, but I've been working with the city here in Lloydminster, and we've been doing anywhere between 2 and 4 a week, and it's a way to keep my mind occupied, and I find that's something a lot of us are starting to focus on now, because you're starting to see some people, me specifically, friends close to me, that, the mental side of it has become a really big thing across our country. But I mean, even further than that, Darren, across the world now, right? Everybody can't escape what's going on worldwide.
Yeah. It's a very fair point, and the mental health side of things is obviously very real, and I've felt that. I've struggled with that at times, and even to go back to my home renovations, normally, I grew up in Western Canada, so I spent a lot of time growing up on the farm in the machine
MacNutt?
shed.
Is it
Well,
MacNutt?
that's kind of, we had a farm near MacNutt. Yes. So I went to elementary school in MacNutt up until grade 9. And then I shifted over to Langenburg, where I went to high school. And I played hockey all the way through in Langenburg and whatnot. But, again, the prairie lifestyle, you spend a lot of your days outside, particularly when you're working on a farm. I mean, that's pretty obvious. So when we bought this new house, it's not like I didn't have the room in the old house, but we bought this new house and we knew we were doing the full scale renovation. And the garage, which is attached to the house, it's a nice 3-car garage. I thought, you know what? I'm going to pimp this baby out. I'm going to pimp this thing out because I need a safe environment for my small bubble of buddies. And really it's primarily, it's 4 dads from minor hockey teams that my son played on over the years, right? So I did that, man. I pimped that garage out. I've got a big screen TV on the wall. I've got a furnace in there that keeps that thing as warm as I need it to be. Did the floors, put a fancy fridge, the whole 9 yards. And afterwards I'm thinking, okay, well, am I just being selfish here? Like, am I just absolutely being, yes, of course I'm being selfish, but it gave me peace of mind knowing that moving forward, because look, the restrictions in Ontario, as they are in Alberta, but Ontario has been, very restrictive for a long period of time. We're not officially in lockdown mode where I am, in the region that I am, but it is still very restrictive. So you have to maintain that very tight bubble group. So I thought, look, we have to have somewhere in the winter where, we can still socially distance, but we've got the big screen TV and we can watch football on Sundays. We can watch whatever the sporting event is. We watch the Masters, for heaven's sake, on there. And I very much look forward to that experience every couple of weeks where, 3 or 4 fellows get together in my garage. Again, we do things as safe as we possibly can. We may crack a beverage or two, watch some sports, and that's how I get my mental health fix when I need it.
Well, listen, you don't have to explain your garage to me. You're looking at what I've built, and I built this in the middle of, at the start of all this. So I know
Nice.
exactly what you mean. You need a happy spot. You need a place where you could go and you kind of, the phone goes off and you kind of forget about the world for a little bit. And I've been saying a lot lately, Darren, that, man, I at times you get annoyed with the amount of chatter about specifically the Edmonton Oilers and specifically Connor McDavid, because for some reason fans like to have the argument whether he's good or not, which hurts my brain. And you wish that away. And then when it goes away and all you get is what's currently going on, man, all I want back is sports and having a little bit of NFL football right now. I mean, NFL finds a way to get through all of this, don't they? Like, they are an absolute juggernaut.
Yes. Yes. In answer to your question, no question about that. And obviously the NFL is an empire, and juggernaut is the right word. I guess what I kind of remind myself on a weekly basis is, if the NFL had been going, during its off season, and the number of tests that we see on a weekly basis, were surfacing, or if, there would have been public outrage, there would have been shock and awe. We'd all been going, how can they still be playing? I mean, this number of personnel or players are testing positive, yet they continue to forge through. But I think we've all kind of grown accustomed to that sort of positioning by the National Football League. And, I think they've been as responsible, and some would argue that they haven't been, but as responsible as they have to be in postponing games and doing all of these things. But I'm not going to lie, I'm still surprised that the NFL, given the size of their rosters, the number of people that simply have to be involved to put on an NFL game, let alone a full-on production on Sundays and the varying games of the week, et cetera, that they've been able to do it and have done it for the most part without significant interruption or a first full-scale league pause. So at the start of this week, Sean, I reported that I wasn't specific to the NFL, but I'll share this with you and our podcast listeners / viewers. You know, the NHL was and still is considering, you know, maybe pushing back the opening of training camps in the National Hockey League until after the holidays. So you're talking about late December, you're talking about early January. And at this point, because of the discussions with the PA, that makes sense. And one of my sources said to me as I was working on this story earlier this week, well, we expect some pretty scary news coming out of the NFL this week. And I haven't seen it yet. I don't know what that news is. But, you know, those leagues pay close attention to one another, right? And so if something bad like a forced pause were to happen in the National Football League, I think that would very much enact a reset button for all major sports where everybody went, okay, the NFL has tried, you know, somewhat miraculously, I would say, to forge forward, but now they're not able to do that. So maybe we better pump the brakes here and just, you know, let the second wave of the pandemic run its course until our health officials and medical experts tell us, okay, you can resume, but we're going to tighten things up. That hasn't happened in the NFL. Here's knocking on wood, hoping that it doesn't happen. But if it were to happen, I think that there'd be a significant ripple effect.
Yeah, well, you're talking about the biggest. I love the NHL, but the NFL once again is a juggernaut. It's the biggest.
Yeah.
Like it is just, and it's a behemoth. And so if they take a step back, it makes sense that every other sport's going to rethink their go forward plans. That's an interesting thought. It's one of the things that I think a lot of people just look forward to having something on the TV to kind of lose themselves in, so to speak. You know, and if that gets taken away and everything gets taken away, geez, I mean, that's a scary thought. You know, I've been wondering this. Go back to you, Darren. I was doing the math. I'd listened to an interview of yours, you know, and the study of Darren Dreger on the way into this podcast. And you said somewhere between 10 and 15 of these you do in a week. Now, I'm not meaning specifically podcasts, but just like sit downs, whatever. And I was doing the math on that. That means in the last 14 years since you've been at TSN, then you've done somewhere over 10,000, and that's probably light. 10,000 sit downs, like just spots, like it hurts my brain. So I got thinking, I'm like, A, you're a hockey insider. You're a sports insider. Geez, you do an exceptional job. Let me put a feather in your cap first most. I mean, like you, now that Bob has hung the cape up, I mean, you're next in line in my opinion, but hey, that's just one guy's opinion out in small town Saskatchewan. Now, in all those interviews of 10,000 plus, has there never been a question asked, or has there ever been a question asked, never asked, that you've wanted asked? Like, is there something that's sitting there that you talk an awful lot about hockey, current events, insider knowledge, breaking down each Canadian team? I mean, like what you do is fantastic. And the fact you can do it across all of Canada is even more impressive.
Yeah.
But that's a lot about the NHL, the sporting leagues. Is there something that Darren Dreger has never been asked that he would love to be asked?
Well, professionally, there is something that, again, hailing from Saskatchewan, this won't come as a surprise to you. But I would like to be asked if I weren't focused and immersed in hockey, right? Professionally speaking, and personally, I mean, hockey's been such a big part of my life. But if I wasn't professionally, you know, stuck with hockey, what other sport would I be covering?
Well, then, if you weren't immersed in professionally, so to speak, in hockey, what would you want to cover?
Curling.
Curling?
I kid you not. I kid you not. And I know I can tell how big of a surprise.
Well,
that it-
I should back that off by saying in Canada, curling's a big deal. But I mean,
Yes.
on the grand scheme of things, curling's not a big deal. And I know I got some people yelling at the radio right now. I get
Yeah.
curling is a big deal. But I mean, we just talked about the NFL for 15 minutes. I mean, like, there's some other sports that would be interesting, but give me your love of curling. Let's hear it.
Well, okay. And again, we're not talking about the finances that go into this. I mean, there are lots of people who do great work covering curling that, you know, if they were covering the National Football League or baseball or the NHL, obviously they'd probably make more money. I don't know.
I should clarify. I wasn't talking about money.
Okay.
I wasn't meaning money. Why go to the NFL? I just mean
Yeah.
I wasn't meaning money.
Okay.
I need to clarify that. I wasn't worried
Right.
about money at all. So the love of curling is interesting to me.
So, you know, again, you mentioned MacNutt, Saskatchewan earlier, and going to school there and then into high school in Langenburg. And, you know, I vividly recall, you know, the school sports, including curling. So, you know, when we weren't we were playing hockey at night and we were curling. I mean, that's what you do in the winters in small town Saskatchewan. There's nothing else to do. And back then we didn't have video games and all that nonsense. And I think we had maybe 4, maybe 6 channels on TV. So you had to do something to occupy your life. And I didn't play a high level of hockey. I got to a point in, I guess it was midget, where I had some SJHL interest, but I just knew that I wasn't going to go anywhere in hockey. And I actually turned out to be a better curler than I was a hockey player, which would surprise no one who grew up with me. But then I got into the business and I worked at GX94 in Yorkton and did a little bit of everything there. You know, I covered hockey, I covered agriculture news, the whole gamut. Then I moved to Brandon. And before I was calling games in the Western Hockey League as play-by-play voice of the Brandon Wheat Kings, again, Sean, I was doing everything, man. I mean, I was doing full-on curling reports. Now, that's what you have to do in small-town radio. I mean, they're sponsored, money-making type of projects, so you have to do it. But all of a sudden, the station started sending me to the Briars. And then when the World Championships were in Canada, I was covering the World Championships. And that's a real interesting and tight fraternity of those who cover curling, especially here in Canada. I'm going to throw a name at you. And I used to travel all the time with this gentleman. What a good dude he is. His name is Resby Coots. That's quite a handle, right?
Yeah.
Resby Coots. And if you want to Google Resby, he is vintage curling when it comes to curling journalism. And we just got to be good friends. I learned a lot from Resby and the inner workings of curling and all that. And I fell in love with the game. I really, truly did. So as ridiculous as it sounds, I always tease the people, Brian Mudrick and company at TSN, I say, just watch your back. You watch your back, because I come from a long line of curlers and I've got a curling background. And if I ever get bored, I'm in my early 50s now, Sean. If I get bored with hockey, don't be surprised if I find a way to, wedge myself into the TSN curling coverage group.
So you curious then? You love it so much, right? Obviously,
Yeah.
that's I've asked that question before, Darren, of if there's anything they remember to ask. Most people can't give me much. They're like, like obviously that one, I like that. So my question then, to follow it up, obviously, is, so if you could transplace yourself, go back to your 20-year-old self, you're doing all these different things. You obviously have a love of curling. Now, maybe I'm wrong on this, and maybe Resby knows better. Maybe Resby told you. But when you go back there, if you had stayed with curling and become the very best at curling, just like you're I'd argue now, one of the very best at hockey, wouldn't the money have followed? Or is it just, it's not possible?
No, it probably would have, but I think you'd have to diversify. Like I think of a colleague of mine, Bob Weeks, right? Bob Weeks is noted for, his coverage of golf for TSN, right? And the multiple shows that he does. He was just part of the TSN panel covering the Masters in Augusta. But he's got a rich curling background, and, he's spent a lot of time covering curling over the years. So, yeah, I think you have to be able to diversify. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. You've got to be willing and able to change with the times. But again, Resby's getting a lot of airtime here, but I recall driving from whatever event back to Brandon, Manitoba. And this was the time where I had the opportunity to I got to think about which station it was. But I could go full time into hockey, or I could stay doing a little bit of everything. And he was hesitant. He was like, "Look, man, curling is such a big part of your life, and you're good at what you do and covering and all of those things. But at the end of the day, you've got to follow a path. And if you think that your path is going to lead you higher up the broadcast food chain, whatever that is, through hockey, then you have to pursue that." And that kind of resonated with me to a point, and then I moved from Brandon into Winnipeg, and it was CKY Winnipeg at the time. And there again, I had the best of all worlds. It wasn't too long before the Winnipeg Jets left the NHL version and became the Phoenix Coyotes. I was the play-by-play voice for the Manitoba Moose, which was the International Hockey League team in Winnipeg at the time, and loved that. But also had the opportunity, because of all the great curlers in Winnipeg, to again cover the Briers and the World Championships locally and whatnot. It just, as my career developed, Sean, especially when I moved to Edmonton out of Winnipeg. When I became host of the Edmonton Oilers in 1997, I was only there for 10 months, 97 through 98. And then 98, I moved to launch CTV Sportsnet in Toronto. But when I got a taste of working very closely with the NHL, I'm not talking about covering the Jets like I did in Winnipeg. I'm talking about having to be, at practice every day, getting to know the players, getting to know the team personnel, traveling on the planes with the Edmonton Oilers, and just being immersed in that world, man, I fell in love with it in a hurry. And then just the gathering of information in the National Hockey League, because it's so immense, and different now with social media. But back then, there were so many good stories to tell that I fell in love with hockey, and very quickly everything else just seemed to get pushed to the wayside, only because there's only 24 hours in a day, and I didn't have enough time to do it all.
Well, I should first let ease off the curlers. I enjoy. I got to be very clear here. I got 3 older brothers, Darren, and you just became probably Dustin, one of my older brothers' favorites now, because he loves curling. Loves curling. I, on the other hand, suck at curling. I am probably the worst curler. I'm just terrible at it. So
it's a hard sport. People don't realize that. They think you just jump on the hack.
No. Hell no. And it's smart. Like when you watch the game, the top levels, man, there's some strategy there. It's a great that way. I can agree. It's a nice grab a sipping beverage and sit and watch it on TV. I 100%.
And I do this with golf. On Sundays, the beauty is you can fall asleep, you can nod off for 45 minutes or so, wake up. Yeah, you might have missed. Somebody got a deuce, this end before they blanked, all of that. But you don't feel like you've missed everything when it comes to golf. I'm not being disrespectful. That's my quiet time and my source of relaxation on the couch on Sundays.
I do it with baseball. Buck and the Toronto Blue Jays. You start out in inning 1, inning 2. Buck lulls you off. You have a nice little nap. You wake up for the 7, 8, 9. It's perfect. I love it. He's got the greatest voice in the world. So I totally get that. Now you bring up the Edmonton Oilers, and if I am correct in thinking, you're there in 97, 98, which means you talk about getting to know a team personally and growing to understand guys and everything. But what you leave out of that year is you get to see Cujo save. You get to see Todd Marchant score Game 7. I'm like 11 years old. Geez, got to do math here. I'm 11 years old. That moment is imprinted in my brain. I'm running around the house. I'm not so sure I was supposed to be up watching that. And somehow you got to be in the building for maybe one of the most iconic moments in Oilers post Stanley Cup winning. Like, that moment is pretty cool.
Yeah, Rennie Corbet, the save, against the Colorado Avalanche, right? And Todd Marchand had about 500 breakaways that season. I mean, and in the playoffs, he was tremendous. A bit of a fun story. So speaking of Landsberg, Saskatchewan, Kelly Buchberger, as you know, also comes from Landsberg, Saskatchewan, and his wife Carla is a twin sister of my best friend in the world, Claire DeCook, and so I mean, I've known Kelly and Carla my entire life, essentially. So Kelly is a captain of the Edmonton Oilers at the time. They beat Colorado before going on to take on Dallas, and I'm doing this live interview into A Channel at the time with Kelly Buchberger. And I don't know, maybe the first or last question I asked, I can't remember. And I said, "Hey, Bucky," I said, if you think back to the start of the season, and the Oilers were expected to struggle that year, could you ever, dreamt or believed that we'd be standing here together after round 1 of the Stanley Cup playoffs? And he looks into the camera and looks at me and says, "Well, I would believe that I was going to be standing here, but I didn't think you'd be standing here with me." In other words, what are you doing here? You have no business being here. You're from, small town Saskatchewan. I'm an NHL. I mean, it was Buchberger poking fun at me, obviously, but that was, again, I'm glad you brought that year up, because, aside from what I said earlier about being, entrenched, embedded with the Edmonton Oilers that season, that was really where the passion for me started to develop at the National Hockey League level, and traveling with that team and, seeing firsthand, everything that these players, had to sacrifice, to get through 2 rounds of the playoffs. We're not talking about getting to the Stanley Cup final, but in Dallas, Sean, that's also where my career took a turn. So as I mentioned, 1998 CTV Sportsnet launches in Toronto. So I'm in Dallas, and Barry Stafford, who's an equipment trainer with the Edmonton Oilers, comes out of the dressing room. It's an off-day skate, and he goes, "Dregs," "there's a call for you in the trainer's room." I'm like, "What?" I literally believe I'm being pranked here, because, again, I'm a member of the media. I'm not employed by the Edmonton Oilers. I'm not part of the inner sanctum here. And I'm like, "Come on, Barry, what's going on?" No, seriously, there's a guy on the phone in the trainer's office, and I think you should take it. It sounds pretty serious. So, all right, I take the bait. I go in there, pick up the phone. It's like an old rotary phone, right? I think we had cell phones, but they were flip phones. And anyway, so I pick up the phone, and I said, "Hey, it's Darren speaking." And "Darren, this is Scott Moore." And at the time, Scott was wasn't the president of CTV Sportsnet, but he certainly would have been a vice president of Sportsnet. And he was managing all of the hiring of all talent in launching this new national network. And he goes, "Scott Moore here from CTV Sportsnet. Tell me something. Why have I never heard of you before?" And I'm like, okay. Now I'm 100% sure I'm getting pranked. I'm like, "Come on, who is this?" And there's a bit of a pause, and he says, "Well, I just told you, it's Scott Moore." And I said, "I'm in the trainer's office in Dallas with the Oilers." I said, "I got a feeling I've been set up." And he goes, No. He goes, excuse me. He goes, "Don Metz gave me your number, passed along a videotape of your work, and I'd like to meet with you because there might be an opportunity for you here in Toronto." And then the light went off, because I literally had just had a meeting with Don Metz before the start of the playoffs. So maybe 3 weeks to a month prior. And I said, look, Metsy, well-connected guy, was a big part of Aquila. And I'm not sure if you've heard of that company out there, but you remember the old Boys in the Bus documentary.
Who doesn't remember
Yeah,
that? Yes.
Of course you would remember that. Well, Don Metz produced and shot all of that. I mean, this guy, when it comes to TV in Western Canada, certainly is iconic. So I had met with him to say, look, I like it in Edmonton. I didn't love that I was doing everything. I mean, I was literally working 20 hours a day because, I was sports director for A Channel. So I was doing all of the other things that you have to do in a sports department. And I was traveling with the team and hosting those games and whatnot. So I was trying to encourage maybe a bigger portfolio with the Oilers and less of what I was doing with the local station. Anyway, he said, well, are you aware that this network is launching in Toronto, CTV Sportsnet? And I said, yeah, I've read about it, but I don't know much about it. And he goes, well, if you don't mind, let me flip a tape. Scott Moore is a good buddy of mine, and let's see where it goes. So as soon as Moore mentioned Don Metz, then I went, oh, geez, he's not kidding. And got through the playoffs, and maybe 3 weeks, a month later, my wife and I were on a plane from Edmonton to Toronto, and for the weekend to spend some time looking at everything Toronto has to offer and getting wined and dined by the Sportsnet brass. And we got back. We basically, I put in my resignation and moved to Toronto. So relatively small world.
And quick. You moved fast. It's very impressive, interesting, like both. Just how quickly, you talk to certain people and it takes a long time to get from one place to the next, and then maybe it spirals from there. Your career trajectory, I mean, it takes time. I'm not saying it doesn't take time, but I mean, in a general sense, you're moving a lot. You go from a tiny little Sass town, then to Yorkton, then to Brandon, then to Winnipeg, then to Edmonton, then to Toronto. What, you go from the tiniest of tiny to the biggest of big in Canada.
Yeah.
Was there an adjustment there?
Oh, huge adjustment. Huge, Sean. And in fact, I've never lived in Toronto. The greater Toronto area, the GTA is technically where I live. It's hard to escape. I mean, when you look at the metropolis that Toronto is. But when my wife and I, Holly and I, first moved to Toronto, she was pregnant with my daughter, Katie. And we lived on the outskirts of Toronto, North York. And we didn't live there very long. About a year or so, bought a house in Ajax, Ontario, again, a suburb of Toronto. And then moved further out to Brooklyn, Ontario, where I'm at now. And when we moved into Brooklyn, it was maybe 5,000 to 7,000 people lived in this tiny little bedroom community, which attracted us to it. We loved it. It's, relatively small town. And now Brooklyn's probably ballooned to 30,000, maybe more, in a relatively short period of time. But we've always kind of adhered to those roots. And my daughter, again, Ryerson University is essentially downtown Toronto. And so where my daughter has been living for the last few years, of course, we go and visit and spend time with her. And each time we go, when we're driving in, I tease my wife and I say, Holly, when I retire, I mean, we should really consider buying a condo down here. I mean, you've got great theater, the Scotiabank isn't that far away. You can go to NHL games. I mean, all the amenities are right here. And she is like, no chance we're doing that. Absolutely zero chance. We're living in a concrete jungle. So we will always say, and this is not a slight, and I repeat myself because this will come as no surprise to you and to those who listen to me. I always refer to myself as Western Canadian, even though again, we've lived in the Toronto area since 1998, both children born in or near Toronto. They'll probably call Ontario home for the rest of their lives. I don't know, depending on what their career paths are. But probably a dozen times a year, we get a bit nostalgic and we start looking at properties in Saskatchewan, in Alberta, lots of family in BC, Sean. And we're like, we're creeping closer to retirement, whenever that is, whatever that looks like. Maybe we should consider making that move. We haven't pulled the trigger on anything yet, but it's the small town roots, and both of us growing up on a farm that keep us a safe distance away from downtown Toronto.
Well, I will say this: there is something very special about small town Saskatchewan, but probably small town communities across the planet. I don't think it's. Well, actually, I know specifically growing up in small town Saskatchewan, there's something special about it. But you hear similar stories about different parts of the world, and I think small towns are just such a tightly knit group there. Everyone looking out for each other, and there's just fun stories. I've got to interview quite a lot, a spectrum of people, and a lot of them from Saskatchewan. And some of the funny stories that go on in the curling rinks and the hockey rinks specifically, because those are the hearts of specifically the Saskatchewan communities, really ties those communities together. But on a bigger sense, all of Saskatchewan can relate with that. That's why a guy like Quick Dick McDick is so popular out here, is because, the guy just resonates with all of Saskatchewan. And Saskatchewan, we haven't had for the last 100 years where if you want to be, I don't know, Darren Dreger, you got to move. So Saskatchewan is, we're like weeds. We're kind of just spread all over the country.
There always seems to be, it doesn't matter who you come across. And I'm surprised by that in Toronto, although less so now over the years. Just, all the people who, maybe if they don't directly hail from Saskatchewan, like Darren Detishin, who's a buddy and of course, a good colleague of mine. You've got people at TSN and throughout our industry who have relatives from Saskatchewan. It always seems to go back to the prairies in some way, shape, or form. So kind of warms the heart when you think of it that way.
Now it is 10 to, we got 10 minutes left. Does that sound about right? And then I should let you go.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Yep.
Got another meeting set up. So
totally cool. Well, what we're going to do then is we're going to go into, actually, before we get to the Crude Master Final Five, I got to ask, because you worked in Brandon. You talk about that being formidable years. Well, you can see over my shoulder, we all know whose jersey that is. He's from my hometown. That's right. He's from Hillmont, Saskatchewan, where I'm from. You got to have a fun story about Wade back when he was young. I assume you were young at the same time, but Wade would have been a young guy, really young. He probably would have been like 16, 17 when he was in Brandon. You got to see him at that time. A fond memory maybe from back then?
Like so many. But I would say that the vast majority of my memories of Wade Redden are hockey specific. And that's not to say that, he doesn't have a personality or, he doesn't have a friendly side to him. Of course he does. Anybody who spent 2 seconds with Wade Redden knows that, he's a very approachable man. And he's done so many great things in every community that he's lived in. I remember, now he's on his way out of the NHL. He was with the New York Rangers, and distastefully so got sent to the American American Hockey League in Hartford. And one of the first things that he did when he got there, because he was making his NHL salary, $6+ million, whatever it was, playing in the AHL, was buy everybody like laptop computers or something along those lines, something of significance, to say, hey, I'm just another guy here, but I recognize I'm making way more money than the rest of you. So my treat. Very giving person. But from a hockey standpoint, Sean, every building that we would go into when I was doing play-by-play, be it scouts, rival coaches, general managers, media, it doesn't matter who, they all said the same thing. Like, does he play with this much poise and confidence all the time? And we're talking about a 16-year-old kid back then, as he was introducing himself, to the Western Hockey League. And that never changed. He was unflappable. And, as he honed his skills, clearly he got better and he got better and he got better and he got better, which led him to be a leader in the National Hockey League and a terrific NHL player. It's cliche to say that as good a hockey player as Wade Redden was, he is every bit as good a person. But in this case, it's 100% right. And, I'll extend that to the rest of the family. I've had the good fortune of spending time, with the Redden family. They're just salt of the earth people, terrific human beings. So I've got nothing but high praise for Wade Redden.
Well, before we start with our Crude Master Final Five, do you need a drink? You have impressed me that you've been able to keep it together without just pausing. You got something? You all right?
I'm okay, but I'm going to tell a quick story because I get asked this, not necessarily on air, but off air all the time. Because especially in the pandemic world we're living in now, anytime you cough or clear your throat, people assume you've got a symptom, right? And I've had dozens of asthma, respiratory related tests. I've had all kinds of acid reflux, stomach related tests, and all sorts of allergy tests on top of that. I've had a cough and like a slight cough and an itchy, scratchy throat on occasion for probably 15 years.
No kidding.
Crazy. Yeah. And I've gone to vocal specialists, and they believe that it's a combination of things. It's the fact that I talk so much, which irritates my vocal cords and whatnot, in combination with maybe food and things that I eat, that sort of thing. But I just want everybody to appreciate that I'm actually healthy, Sean. I'm in good.
Fair.
I just
Fair.
need to clear my throat.
Normally, yeah. The only reason I bring it up is because I can see it.
Yeah.
And I did not know that. I had no idea. I'm
Well,
glad
not
I
many
asked.
people do. Yes.
I'm glad I asked.
You're very astute.
Well, here, let's do the Crew Master Final Five so I can get you out on time so you can get to your next one.
Yeah, no problem.
Busiest man on the planet here. Okay, so 5 quick questions. Shout out to Crude Master Transport, Heath and Tracy McDonald for supporting the podcast since the very beginning.
Thank you.
Now, my first one, since it's your first time on, is always, if you could sit down like this, and I know you guys do the Ray and Drags podcast, and you guys have had some phenomenal guests. But let's say you could have anyone on the planet, past or present, on the Ray and Drags podcast to sit down and pick their brain like we're doing. Who would you want to sit down and have a beer with?
Arnold Palmer.
Arnold Palmer.
Yeah. I'm far from an Arnold Palmer aficionado. I know perhaps more than the basics, but the King just epitomized class as a golfer at the top of his field for so many years. And again, for me, it transcends beyond the game. What are you doing in society? What are you doing in your community? What are you doing to help the world? And everything that I've read, everything that I saw when Arnold Palmer was alive just led me to believe that he was a terrific human being. But we've all got skeletons, right? And we've all got secrets and stories to share. I'm not sure that he'd want a lot of those out there, and I'm just guessing. I don't know what they are, but I was fascinated. Still, I'm fascinated by Arnold Palmer just because of the aura of the life that man lived. So he'd be one for sure, but I could probably come up with a few more.
That's an interesting one. That's the first time that guy's been brought up. And you talk about skeletons and everything. I think that's what makes a person human. I think it's endearing
100%
to hear about what makes a person, because as long as it's on a format like this and not just a headline, you can talk about what you're doing in that part of your life. And I mean, people understand. Listen, there's nobody on this planet Earth that doesn't have a few skeletons, like you said, in their closet
100%.
and can understand. Oh yeah, well that makes sense, right?
For sure.
Number 2, Mike Tyson and Roy Jones Jr. just had their 50 on 50 fight. Watched it, enjoyed it. Now, if Darren Dreger could pull somebody out of the media into a boxing ring, who would you challenge?
Ooh. Well, from a fun approach, maybe Ryan Rashog. our Edmonton Bureau guy. And I say that, of course, and look, Rashog's fight card is better than mine. He at least had a cup of coffee in the Western Hockey League, and I've seen at least one of his WHL fights. He did okay. Self-deprecating humor. He thinks that he got pummeled, and he really didn't. But we've traveled so much together that we know how to push each other's buttons better than anyone. So I could have some fun swatting him around. Beyond that, I like to think I get along with everybody. I will say this, Steve Simmons, who's a columnist with the Toronto Sun, I interviewed Roger Nielsen years and years and years ago. And it wasn't long after the diagnosis of Roger Nielsen having cancer. And Simmons in his Sunday column, and I can't remember the exact quote, and Steve and I have talked about this since, and he's a decent guy, and he's an excellent columnist, so I'll pay him his due. He wrote something along the lines, I did this long sit-down interview with Roger Nielsen. It was set up by Mike Keenan. And Roger, before we started, said, look, very, very man of faith, like very religious person, right? So he said, can you please ask me if I'm afraid to die? And it's a pretty deep question, man.
It certainly is.
It's a pretty deep question. And the reason he wanted me to ask that, again, was just an expression of his faith, and that he just believed that as much as he had done in his life, he was going to a better place. And he wanted to convey that message and just how confident he was at the time in his faith. And so I asked the question. Of course, I'm going to ask the question. And I don't know specifically if it was that question Simmons didn't like, but he said, for any aspiring broadcaster or journalist who wants to learn how to not ask a question or interview somebody, watch this interview that Darren Dreger did with Roger Nielsen. Man, that pissed me off. Like, that stuck me right between the eyes. And look, I've been criticized a million times, and I don't even think that's an exaggeration. That 100% comes with the territory, but that one hurt. And so I'd like to take at least two good swipes at Steve Simmons, just dating back to that interview, which was probably 15, 16 years ago, something like that.
Well, I appreciate you asking the question, because I think that's, I personally, as you've felt from the way I do I think that's a great question. I think that'd be tough to ask, but a worthwhile one to do. So the fact he wanted you to ask it, I think is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Now we're closing in on time here. So
no, that's okay. So let's get, what do we got? 3 left?
We got 3 left.
Okay. I'll be quick. I promise.
No. I don't want you to be quick. I just want to make sure you get on to your next thing. I don't want to hold you up. So number 3 is, I changed it because now knowing your fascination of curling.
Yeah.
If you were to go to a 2-person curling bonspiel, you had to pick one teammate to take with you. Who are you taking?
Well, probably my good buddy Claire DeCook, who, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, is Carla Buchberger's twin brother. And we've been like brothers, since high school. And he's a tremendous curler. He's been a whisker away from the Briar a number of times over the years. So that would be one for sure. But then if you look at it on a bigger scale, these Northern Alberta or Northern Ontario boys, Brad Jacobs and the Harnden brothers, I've spent some time, helped raise a bit of money for charity with them at a golf tournament. Any one of those guys, I would happily saddle up with. Wayne Madaw is a good buddy of mine. Jeff Stoughton, always liked Jeff Stoughton. And Kerry Burtnick, can't forget Kerry Burtnick from my Winnipeg days as well. So that's more than one.
I see him behind you. You got a bunch of books. I assume that relates that you enjoy some reading. What book would you recommend me, or what are you currently reading? Either or.
Well, I've read a couple here. The Eddie Olchuk book is fantastic. That one's right there. I'm not sure you can see it.
Okay.
Hockey Confidential that Bob McKenzie is pushing is a good one. Beauties, which James Duthie is pushing, I'm in. So any book that I'm in, Sean, I enjoy. But you see, Nick Kiprios also put out his undrafted book, and I'm in that one as well. So those are the ones that I've leafed through. I haven't read them cover to cover. Eddie Olchuk's is fantastic just because it includes his battle with cancer and the support that he had from friends and family and whatnot. Oh, and did I mention I'm in that one as well? So
You just gave me all the books you make a cameo in. That's what you're saying?
Pretty much. Pretty much.
All right. Your fifth and final one. What was the worst part of being seatmates with Chris Dingman back in Brandon? He has been on the podcast. He mentioned that he got to be seatmates with you. So it's your turn to fire back at Mr. Dingman.
Well, it's pretty obvious his enormous size. I mean, he's been 6'4", 6'5", 220, 230, whatever. He's probably trimmed down now since he was like 14 years old. You know, he breaks into the Western Hockey League as a mountain of a man. You had the Twin Towers there in Colin Cloutier and Chris Dingman. Just two terrific young lads. I don't know that I've laughed so hard in my life than the time that I spent with Dinger and that group, particularly on the bus. But, because he was a young guy, he didn't have the benefit of going back into the bunks of the old Wheat King bus. There was like a dozen bunks or so back there, and they were all reserved for the veterans. So the young guys maybe got to sleep an hour or two, and that was only when the veterans would depart, and they'd allow these youngsters to climb into one of the bunks for an hour or so. So you know what that meant? Dinger's like buffalo-sized head would be on my shoulder half the time on some of the long road trips. So
you made a good pillow, did you?
That and he could eat like a horse. And it was good for me from a health perspective because, look, I'm not burning calories. All I'm doing is calling the games. I mean, I'm not, so we'd stop at whatever the pizza place was on the way home after a game and load up on the ZA, and I'd get the same size pizza that every player got. Well, I can't eat 12 pieces of pizza. So Dinger would give me the wink every single time. Hey, you make sure you bring that pizza on the bus. So there's the good and the bad of Dinger. You don't get that big without looking after yourself and making sure that you're eating well. And he ate well because he ate his dinner and half of mine pretty much every day.
Well, thanks for hopping on, Darren. I really appreciate it. It's been a fun little hour sitting down with you.
My pleasure, Sean. Thanks for thinking of me, and thanks for having me. And congratulations on your list of guests, by the way. Not that I'm a podcast snob, because I like to help out wherever I can. But I went through your list of podcast guests. I guess the only thing that disappointed me was the fact that I'm like 52 on your list of NHL interviews.
I'd like to point out I messaged and never ever got a response. So we're going to put that one back on Darren Dreger.
I did explain, and I am so bad with this. I barely can DM people on Twitter, let alone try and manage my messages on Instagram. Like, Instagram for me is a means of showing pictures of my dog and what's going on. So I apologize, but I'm glad we were able to connect.
Yeah. Thanks again, Darren.
You bet. Thank you.